here we go. And welcome everybody. My name is Frances Billinghouse. I'm coming to you from Kaurna country here in the Adelaide Plains, and acknowledge the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains being the traditional custodians of this land. A little bit of a background about myself. I'm an author of a few books, including with my latest book. You might have seen me mentioning it on the socials, and I have a free book launch next month in relation to On Her Silver Rays, which is going to be officially released next month through an English publisher called Moon Books. So you can pre-order it if you are interested. When I send out the recording, I'll put all the links in the chat because I don't want to take time away from this presentation. So a little bit about myself. As I said, I have been interested in metaphysics and occult sciences for basically the majority of my life, and am actively following what I call an eccentric spiritual path, which is one that I have been following since my late teens. I also do a lot of other things like reading cards, do energetic healing, past life regressions, and so on. So basically, I classify myself as, I suppose, modern day mystic. It's a very controversial term, but I term that because I seek the door that has no key to understand the sacred mysteries of land and sky and earth and sea, as above, so below, and so mote it be. And I think that just sums up everything that I am interested in the universe and more. So, as I said, I have quite a bit to talk about this morning, and I would like to start off with the presentation that you're all here to see. What I might do is just turn off all the people so you can actually watch the PowerPoint as well. And I will be stopping every now and then just in case there's anything in the chat. So using the moon as a portal to the mysteries. So as it is a little bit long, this presentation, I do hope you can stay to the end. I'll be doing a journey, and I will be sending out the recording to everybody, hopefully within 48 hours as well. So let's begin by looking at a little bit of some background to the moon. And the moon is our closest luminary. It's the Earth's only natural satellite. It gently waxes and wanes in the heavens above us. Probably for as long as human existence, there's been this otherworldly pull or feeling about the moon. It's very evident from the mysteries and the mythologies around the world that everybody else from time immemorial has felt this mystery about the moon. They've built various structures, and many are still with us today, but all in alignment with the various phases of the moon, including this one for the temple of Demeter or Demeter in the Valley of the Temples in Italy, which is orientated to face the full moon. And this is actually above the Acropolis from the backside of the building. You're probably more familiar with solar temples, but this is one of the lunar temples that we still have today. So the moon, seemingly innocent as she, is she a she? I tend to refer to the moon as feminine in nature. It's just how I was always taught, Lady Lunar. I do realize that there are lunar gods as well. Maybe put in the chat whether you see her as she he, or maybe you just see the moon as the moon. Anyway, I'm going to be referring to her probably in the feminine constraint for the moment, because she glides somewhat innocently across the skies, yet her influence pulls on the tides. Here on Earth, some 382,500 kilometers away. And these tides that she pulls on are the ocean tides, the sea tides, emotional tides, and according to some people, also the tectonic tides below our Earth's surface as well. It is believed that our early ancestors considered the moon to be the, quotes, universal mother, the queen of heaven, who symbolized an absolute principle of femininity and fertility. The moon was believed to make all things grow and governed all life-giving moisture. Its changing phases were associated with the coming rain, as well as the torrents that produced the floods that we know in Egypt and also throughout Mesopotamia. Its fertilizing power governed not only the plants and animals, but also at one stage, human beings as well. And in some cultures, it was believed that women who slept beneath the rays of the moon would become impregnated by them. And this even lasted into our modern day, when a Slovakian doctor alleged that he'd discovered an ancient Assyrian astrological text indicating that women were most fertile during certain phases of the moon. And he actually went on to base a whole entire family planning method around this hypothesis. So whether this is true or not, modern science seems to contradict itself. But it is certainly interesting to note, and I do know a lot of women, especially during your moon times, your menstruations, tend to either bleed on the full moon or the dark moon. So moving into the 4 main phases of the moon. Today it's very popular working with the moon, in particular using the waxing moon as the moon begins to appear in the sky to manifest things in your life, and the waning moon to release or vanish things in your life. However, at least according to me and the work that I do, there is so much more to the moon than that. And I do go into more detail in my book that I don't really want to plug here. And I also have updates on my YouTube channel. So I'll just give a little brief overview in this presentation for those who are interested in this area. Largely when the moon orbits around the Earth, it reflects the sun's light. It doesn't actually have any light of its own. So from the very first sliver of the waxing moon, this is what we often call the new moon, it begins to grow in size to the full moon, as we see in this middle image here. And as the moon increases in size, it's also believed that anything that you want to bring into your life will also increase in abundance. On the full moon, this is usually a time of sort of rest and completion and giving thanks, and also observing what you have achieved. The moon then decreases in size, and we move down to what's called the 4th quarter moon, onto when the moon disappears from sight. Now, what this extra phase of the moon is called can be a little bit, I would say, controversial, but it does differ from person to person. As we see in this main diagram, we've actually got 8 phases of the moon. And this breakdown further of the moon basically can be attributed to an American astrologer, Dane Rudyard, who divided the motions of the moon into 8 main phases. And in this diagram, they're just calling them a waxing crescent and a waning crescent. the first quarter, and also waxing and waning quarters on the other side. However, some people call them by different names, in particular, these last two phases after the full moon, the waning gibbous, and also the waning crescent. The waning crescent can also be known as the Decimic moon, but it really doesn't matter what moon names you refer them to. What is interesting is that for us in the southern hemisphere, our moons are actually a little bit different. So I'll just go back to this first image where you see the crescent moon facing to the left and the waning crescent moon facing to the right with the full moon in the middle. This is the standard imagery that we're used to when we're talking about the moon, the crescent facing to the left, the full moon, and then the crescent facing to the right. For those of us in the southern hemisphere, however, whether you are aware of this or not, our crescent moon of our waxy moon actually faces to the right. Then we go to the full moon, and then our waning crescent faces to the left. And this is all because of the position we are on Earth when it comes to the moon. As you can see here, those of you in the northern hemisphere, you're seeing this part of the moon. We in the southern hemisphere are actually seeing another part of the moon all together, which isn't really talked about in a lot of the books about the moon, working with the moon. Not that it has much of an influence, still waxing and waning, but when it comes to symbolisms, because our symbol in the southern hemisphere of the waxing moon is actually pointing to the right. I suppose I'm getting a little bit pedantic in relation to that. It all depends on how you feel and utilize the moon. Now, I would like to point out at this stage, I'm not an astrologer. I do have a deep interest in the cosmos above and how it does affect us here on Earth. And I also believe that there is a difference between what they call the new moon and what they call the dark moon. If you are an astrologer, it'll be interesting to put in the chat if you believe there is a difference, because I'm coming from this angle from a more esoteric background. As you can see in this diagram, up the top, we have what's depicted as the dark moon, when there is no moon in the sky whatsoever. And then for a brief period of time, just as it's opposing full moon, when the moon is at its peak for a very short period of time. Some people say this is 3 days. I personally think there's actually a time where the moon peaks, either where it's no longer in the sky or when it's at its fullest. They said this is just my perception coming from what I follow in my background. So when the moon then begins to show with these first slivers, to me, this is the new moon coming in. So this aspect here is actually the dark moon, very brief period of time where there is complete darkness. And I think personally that is important, because in our modern world, we are losing this connection with darkness, largely due to our reliance on 24-hour lighting. And we're forgetting that darkness is vitally important to our being. And again, this is something I'll be talking about next month, where I'm holding a webinar on the winter solstice, because the winter solstice here in the southern hemisphere. I'll give the links out when I send out the recording. And if you're in the northern hemisphere and also would like to join, you're more than welcome to do so. So when the sky is cloaked in darkness, it becomes easier for us to shed unnecessary emotional baggage, including letting go of those people or ideas that no longer serve or add value to our lives. And it also lures us into looking deeper into the longings of our soul and really getting in touch with who we are. In all honesty, I believe that regardless of what phase the moon is in, it can be used as a portal to explore the realms of what's been hidden from our conscious view, even from thought, which may also be in the peripheral or beyond our peripheral for various reasons. And when you think about it, it does seem quite logical. After all, the moon has long been connected with the psyche, with the hidden, with the mystical realms, with the in-between spaces. I might just turn myself back onto the screen now. We do have a lot more people who have joined, and for everybody else who has joined while this webinar has started, when I send out the recording, you'll get a chance to watch all of it. If you don't receive the recording, say by the end of the week, just send me an email and I'll put my details in the chat and I can send it out to you. So let's continue on our journey with the moon. As I have mentioned, our nearest luminary doesn't actually produce light of its own. It reflects the sun. And as such, this has led to the connection between the moon and the unseen, the in-between places, luminal spaces, the magic and the mystical. And as such, many folk traditions have emerged over the aeons, basically connected with the moon and its mysteries and its allure on us. I do recall being, quite young, about 5 or 6. My grandmother would make us curtsy at the new moon, turn over, I suppose it was a 6-pence coming to a 5-cent piece at that stage, in our pockets, any pieces of silver, and leave them out for the moon to be blessed. Now, this was quite interesting because when she passed, she was actually buried as an Anglican, so it's not sort of Anglican Christian behavior, but she was of that era which folklore and folk traditions were very much part of their everyday consciousness. So if you have any little sort of qualms or folk traditions from your childhood that you can remember that maybe an elderly relative or maybe you still practice today, feel free to put them in the chat because I'd be interested in hearing or reading about them as well. Also, how many of us were told that the moon was made out of cheese, that there was a man who lived in the moon, or even a rabbit. I think in Asian cultures, they say there's a rabbit that lived in the moon. And in other cultures, and there are other beings that also live in the moon, as well as gods and goddesses as well. Here in Australia, our Indigenous peoples have a lot of dreaming stories, creation stories, and also other stories within their cultures about the connection of, in particular, the cosmos and how that came into being. In particular, one story connected with the moon comes from Arnhem Land, which is right at the top part of Australia. That explained the waxing and the waning of the moon, which occurred during the high tide, where the waters of the sea would all run towards the moon, and at low tide, all the sea waters will actually run out of the moon. And this actually resulted in all the different phases of the moon. This sort of mythical analogy was somewhat lost on an Australian anthropologist, Charles Montfort, who in, I think it was the 1960s, he wrote a book about the Indigenous peoples and noted that there was no scientific evidence that they, people of Arnhem Land, actually saw this seawater coming in and out of the moon. Now, I'm sort of laughing to myself because this sort of highlights probably the difference between more Western mindset, where we are very factual, scientifically driven. And even back in the early 60s, we needed to see proof, compared to this beautiful mythological poetry interweaving and telling of stories that is woven through a lot of Indigenous cultures to help them explain things. And even though those of us from a more Caucasian background or European background, we still have this very deep in our subconscious, this poetic interpretation of how the world came into being, only we seem to dismiss it. Call myths and stories just myths and stories. We tend to distance ourselves, unfortunately, away from this beautiful poetic underpinning the storylines that can be found in our culture, having been driven for the last 200, 300, probably even more thousands of years of having to understand truth of fact. And when we think about the moon with her ebbing, flowing nature, it's this poetic thread that Lady Lunar offers us. It's the opportunity to get out of our left brain stuckness, if that's such a word, and back into the natural ebbing and flowing between our conscious reality and the deeper intuitive level of awareness that flows not only around us, but also through us and through the universe as well. It's just like the mysterious moon ebbing and flowing, disappearing and reappearing. And the only time it really doesn't do that is during eclipses, where the sun blocks, or the moon actually blocks out the sunlight partially or the whole sunlight. And it's interesting that when we look at myth, the sun tends to be the more sort of solid character. We seem to be able to know when the sun always rises and sets in its peak. The moon, even though it does the same sort of thing, its ebbing and flowing nature has seemed to, over the aeons, led to more magical or mystical feats or powers being attributed to it. So I did mention briefly about eclipses. We've recently just gone through the first eclipse season of the year. And while we do know that the eclipse occurs when the moon moves between the Earth and the sun, as in the case of a solar eclipse, or is blocked by the sun's shadow, as is the case in the lunar eclipse, our ancestors didn't always see it that way. In some folklore, the solar eclipse was probably the most terrifying, because this is when day was turned to night. To the ancient Greeks, this is a sign of the angry gods, and also marked the beginning of disasters and destruction. In New Mexico, the Tawa people there believed a solar eclipse signified an angry sun that left the skies in order to venture into his house, which was in fact in the underworld. The ancient German people, however, had a little bit more romantic view, and they had a story of the sun being a very hot female who ruled the day, who was married to a very cold, sleepy male who ruled the night. And every now and then, seeking companionship, the moon, which was the man, was drawn to his bride, who was the sun. And this created a solar eclipse. When it comes to the lunar eclipses, however, according to Hindu scriptures, this is when a demonic god called Rahu held the sun and the moon by his mouth. And he was associated with negative energy and ill fortune. And The lunar eclipses were a result of him drinking an elixir of immortality that led to twin deities, being the sun and the moon. And as such, Rahu chases the sun and the moon across the skies to devour them. And if he catches them, an eclipse forms as he swallows the moon, which later reappears at the back of his neck. So probably a little bit more closer to home, Christianity, lunar eclipses were often associated with the wrath of God, and they were connected with the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. And this is why Easter occurs on the first Sunday, just after the first full moon in spring in the northern hemisphere. It's in autumn here in the southern hemisphere, ensuring that an eclipse never occurs on the Easter Sunday. Otherwise, that would potentially mark Judgment Day. And in our modern world, there are still some cultures who do follow a lunar calendar, in particular Hinduism. They have a lot of lunar gods and festivals, and also Islam, their calendar is also connected with the moon. Many of our ancient sites are solar orientated. However, as I showed right at the beginning with the Temple of Demeter, there are still who are or were aligned with the moon, in particular Stonehenge to the top and Karnak in France to bottom. Both of these were believed to have originated, been orientated to the moon, and then later were transformed or transferred to being depicted or aligned with the sun. So this was all done around about 3000 plus BCE, before Common Era. And even today, we are a little bit unfamiliar as to what the true purpose of these alignments are. One that I have visited a few times, which has a little personal connection to me, is on the Isle of Lewis, top of Scotland. And the mountain range is known as Sleeping Beauty, or Sleeping Mother, or the Sleeping Goddess. And the Isle of Lewis is the Outer Hebrides, as I mentioned, off the west coast of Scotland. I won't try to pronounce the Gaelic, but it means old woman of the moors. And as you can see, it does actually look like a woman. This is actually her nose moving down to her breast. And what happens every 18.5 or so years is what's known as the lunar sandstorm. And this is when the full moon appears to rise out between her legs and then creeps along her body and then hangs low over her breasts before disappearing. And there's actually a cairn or a stone circle at the top of her head. I said this happened every 16.5, maybe 16.6, 18.6 years. And I do believe that the next time the lunar standstill will be occurring is next year, or 2025. So this webinar is entitled Using the Moon basically as a portal to the mysteries. So what do I mean by the mysteries? To me, the mysteries are the unknown, things that are not consciously aware, relating to our psyche, to the in-between worlds, to the mystical, to the unseen. And in my own earth-centric spiritual tradition, there is a rite that's deeply connected to lunar mysteries, and that's one that's called drawing down the moon. Its origins tend to stem back, I'm not saying direct lineage, but tends to be at least influenced or drawn upon rites that were happening around about the 5th century BCE. That's if written records or anything to go by. Where a rite in a northern part of Italy took place or was recorded to have been taken place by local witches who were said to command the moon through their swords. And we can see in the sketch, and this is basically all we have left. The only knowledge of this has come from writing and a sketch from a vase. The vase, unfortunately, has been lost, but we have this sketch of the vase from 19th century German scholar Wilhelm Reich. And the vase was believed to have dated back to the 2nd century BCE. And here we have two witches, so-called witches, drawing down the moon, holding swords. And it was believed that they would hold the sword in a particular fashion where the moon's rays or light would actually be reflected down the blade, causing them or the other person to go into a trance. And as I said, this rite is more sort of enacted these days within lunar groups, not just within witchcraft or other earth-centric spiritualities. A lot of people who are beginning to work with the moon are doing their own version of drawing down the moon. Within more earth-centric traditions, this is where the high priestess of the group becomes the goddess incarnate. She goes into a trance, and then the goddess or the divine feminine speaks through her. If you are on your own, you don't belong to a group, there is no reason why you can't perform a version of this rite yourself to get in touch with those mysteries, similar to what was done in ancient times. You don't need a sword to draw down the lunar rays, but you can use a bowl of water. I prefer to use spring water and then hold it out under the full moon and watch the lunar light or the reflection of the moon appear in the bowl as the lights come down. And this is one way that we can then really tap into the lunar energy. Now, I'm just cautious of time because I do tend to speak far too much. And what I wanted to do is to take those of you who are able to, who are wanting to, on a little bit of a journey to connect with the moon. So if you are wanting to, just going to move myself from the screen, get yourself into a comfortable position. Oops, I don't want to do that. And close your eyes. Make sure that your back is aligned as straight as possible. Gently rest your hands in your lap. Taking a couple of deep breaths into your diaphragm. And as you inhale, exhale, allowing your shoulders to relax. And then bring your awareness to the top of your head, opening up your crown chakra, Sarasvara, and connecting to divine source energy. Inhaling, exhaling. Before bringing your conscious awareness to your third eye, that space between your eyebrows, opening up your Ajna chakra. Just inhaling and exhaling. Before bringing your conscious awareness to your throat, opening up your Vishuddha chakra. Inhaling Exhaling. Bringing your conscious awareness to your heart. Opening up your Anahata chakra. Inhaling. Exhaling. Relaxing your body from the top of your head to the tips of your toes. Moving down to your solar plexus, Manipura. Inhaling. Exhaling. Moving down to the sacral area, Swadhisthana. Inhaling. Exhaling. And then finally moving down to the base of your spine. This is Muladhara. Inhaling and exhaling. Relaxing your body from the top of your head to the tips of your toes. Breathing in the darkness, the nurturing darkness that allows the seeds to rest, ready for germination, deep within Mother Earth. Breathing in the dark that allows the stars to shine brightly in the cosmos above. Inhaling and exhaling. And above your head, visualize, imagine the silvery orb of the moon, Lady Lunar, Grandmother Moon, sending down lunar moonbeams into your crown chakra, Sarasvara. And as you inhale, breathe in the lunar energy. It's cool and calming. It's relaxing. This lunar energy moving down through you, calming, centering you from the top of your head to the tips of your tongue. And before you, imagine, visualize, there is an ocean, gently ebbing and flowing. Waves gently massaging the shore as they move across the shoreline, in and out. Exhale, inhale, and tune with the waters. The moon shining, reflecting on the surface. The shadow light of the moon stretching towards you, enticing you, calling you to enter. Inhale, exhale. Dip your toes into the edge of the water. It is warm, comforting. Inhale, exhale. The water, the moon is calling you to surrender. Surrender your hesitations. Surrender your fear. Surrender your phobias and limitations. To the gentle, ebbing and flowing nature of the water. You slowly begin to walk into the water's edge, feeling it lap gently around your ankles, massaging, calming you, offering you a sense of peace. Continue slowly walking until it reaches your mid-calf, massaging, calming you, offering you a sense of inner peace. Walk a bit further until it reaches your knee, massaging, calming you, offering you again a sense of peace. Do you dare to walk further? Before you make up your mind, you notice the shell floating on the surface of the water towards you. Pick it up and hold it to your ear. Allow the ancient wisdom and guidance of the ocean that has long been the subconscious messenger of the moon enter your ear and your psyche. All the while the ocean's water is gently ebbing and flowing around you, taking away hesitancy, taking away any fears or phobias, taking away any limitations that you may have, which are holding you back from this lifetime. Inhale and exhale. It is the moon that is the portal to the ancient mysteries that has long been with us since the beginning of time, and which will continue to remain with us. Only that we have forgotten our connection. We have become too busy, too ego-driven, too solar conscious to allow this gentle ebbing and flowing of the moon to open the doors to these liminal realms. Inhale and exhale. Surrender to the moon. And remain for a while, deeply inhaling the ancient lunar wisdom and exhaling anything that has been limiting, restricting you. Opening your heart, your mind, your psyche, your soul to all the possibilities that are around us in the cosmos and which are contained within the watery depths of the ocean that have been reflecting these wisdoms since time began on this planet and beyond. As you take a deep breath again, inhale and exhale. Gaze up at the silvery orb above you, offering your thanks. And slowly make your way back to the water's edge, to the foreshore, to dry land. The ocean gently wrapping around your knees, your calves, your ankles, and finally just your toes. And with each step, you begin to come back to your normal waking consciousness, feeling more alive and more refreshed, more at peace, and with a degree of lunar calmness surrounding your whole being. Taking another deep breath, and as you do, begin to open your eyes. And for those who have joined later, when I send out the recording, you'll be able to do this meditation at your own speed then. So I just wanted to first thank you for coming up to an hour already. Time has gone very quickly this time with me. And I hope you have gotten something out of this webinar and has inspired you to start using the moon as a portal to the mysteries. I just want to make mention, as I had pointed out earlier, my book on the moon and her silver rays, Guide to the Moon, Myth and Magic, is going to be officially released next month. So I am doing move me from the screen, an online book launch on Saturday, the 17th of June. Due to the differences in time zones, I'm doing two launches. I'll probably go for about an hour, maybe a little bit longer, maybe an hour and a half, depending on who's on. 8 a.m. This is all Australian Central Standard Time, and the other one will be 6 p.m. So the details are on my website. And another thing that I'm very excited about is, I mentioned it earlier, in June here in the Southern Hemisphere, it will be the winter solstice. So I will be doing a 9 Zoom gathering. And if you're in the Northern Hemisphere, I'll just take me off the screen, looks like we can't see those links there. The times don't quite add up. It's in the early morning. If you're in America, it's 8 p.m. Australian Central Standard Time. And we'll be talking about the winter solstice, and in particular, that importance, and I did mention it in this webinar, of that point of darkness. If you are in the Northern Hemisphere, of course, you'll be coming to your summer solstice, but 6 months from now, you will also be engaging in the winter solstice as well. And I just have one more point that I might just stop sharing my screen now, is I'll just change screens if I can multitask. And this is my new website, the Mystical Soul Academy. I am excited about, and I'm not going to bore you with all of the details, but if you come down the page, find a section of things that I'm personally interested, that I'm hoping to share with you. If you're wanting to learn more about the winter solstice event, click on this Align with the Seasons, and it will actually take you to my perceptions on why it is important for us to work with the seasons, especially in our modern life, because it does help us get back to our essence of our being. But there is something that I wanted to share, and it's this 7-part course that I'm currently working on. Those of you who know of my work know that a number of years ago, I put out the book on the Dark Goddess. I particularly used goddesses or deities as sort of devotional aspects more than archetypal, but I do have this 7-part, I call it an embodied adventure, using one of them, probably more popular stories to start off with, the descent of the goddess, which is from ancient Sumeria, of Inanna going into the underworld. So we'll be using that as a framework in part to go into our deep soul self, to actually truly look at what is holding us back, but also, and this is something that I find that a lot of people, when they do shadow work, they tend to just focus on the negative aspects, the suppressed, the oppressed, the rejected aspects of the shadow. But there's also what Carl Jung, a psychoanalyst, called the golden shadow. So we'll be exploring that. So the 7 modules that we would do on a fortnightly basis. Again, this is all live, it will be all recorded. So even if the time zones don't line up, you do get the course yourselves to go back to unlimited. So module 1 is preparing for the descent. And this is where we look at what the word shadow self is all about. We talk about Inanna's story as she descends into the underworld. And then we actually go through the 7 chakras or energy centers within our own bodies, because the 7 chakras line up with the 7 gates that Inanna had to move through. And ever since the story has evolved, especially in modern concepts where it's been refound, there has been this connection with the 7 gates to the 7 chakras, to our 7 auric fields, to 7 classical planets that were originally discovered, that the ancient Mesopotamians in particular, because of their really acute knowledge of astrology, all of this is connected with. Module 2, we look at the myth of Kore or Persephone, in part because there's 2 parts to this story as well. From when she was merely a maiden, she had no title. So we're looking at what this reflects in on us. And then she goes into the underworld, where she, in my interpretation of the story, she steps into her sense of power. So I see the story of Kore's descent and her emergence into Persephone as a rite of passage, transformation, and of herself as her stepping into her personal power. So we look at who we have become in the eyes of other people, and are we in our own power. Module 3, working with one of my favorite goddesses, Kali Ma, from the Hindu pantheon. She is a very complex being, even within Hinduism, depending on where you are trained, people see her differently. To the tantrics, she is the great mother, that she is Ma, she created everything, but she also destroyed everything in order to recreate. So she reminds us of this ebbing and flowing nature, which was seen with the moon. She can be very confrontational because she will smash our rose-tinted glasses, and she will make us look at aspects of ourselves that we hide behind, that we are ashamed of, that we are not ready or have ignored, refused to integrate properly. Yet in doing that, she is, as I said, the great mother. She is there to, there's a sense of comfort, as I would say protection, but it goes beyond that. There's a sense of coming home when you surrender to her power, her essence, her energy. And this is what we will be working with when we work with Kali. We will be severing the cords that connect us to probably more earth-centric, energetic connections, past lovers, past relationships, even maybe friends, families that we have moved away from. We are all connected to everybody in our lives through these energetic cords. And with her scimitar, her sacred sword, she removes all of those from us, which can be quite confronting as we realize or have the sense of freedom or release, and we're not 100% integrated in that sensation. Module 4, we go back to the story of Kore and Persephone. And in this story, as Persephone becomes queen of the underworld, she's discovering her authentic self. She is moving through the limitations, maybe even subliminally, that her mother Demeter had actually placed on her, because up until then she was just known as Kore, maiden. She didn't have a name. So what else did Persephone discover when she was in the darkness, when she was in the underworld, when she was transforming into Hades' queen? And there are different versions of the story. Some versions say that she was abducted and she was raped. Some stories say that she voluntarily went down. And this is where we go into the golden shadow and look at the hidden gifts, the hidden talents, soul potentials that we have waiting for us, that we may have also suppressed, neglected. Maybe we have been told all through our lives that certain, I was told growing up that I was really good at maths and boys didn't like brainy girls. So I dumbed down my interests in maths. You might have been told other things, that certain, when we're trying to form our social connections, that to be accepted meant you had to not shine so brightly. You had to forever put praise on somebody else, because if we put it on ourselves, we are then depicted as big shots or too egocentric. Or you may have experienced what's called in Australia, I'm not sure if it's known around the world, tall poppy syndrome, when you appear to, by other people, and it's usually other people's perceptions, when you are appearing to be too good at something, people will try and cut you down. And that, in effect, is just a sign of their own insecurities. What we do when we look at these limiting beliefs, we then see when we do it to other people as well. And I said, when we do true shadow work, it's not all love and light. It can be very hard, very confronting, and we can even find ourselves in a place going, how I was such a horrible person to these people through the stage in my life. But this is the whole essence of this work, is to come to that realization, and then you can move on, make amends, or even apologize, however you see fit, or the situation is in your own environment. Module 5 is removing the masks. We all have masks that we put on. And the myth that we were looking at in this module is Medusa, who was believed, was, as the story goes, she turned people into stone. Yet before that is a backstory. She was once a beautiful priestess of Athena. So as the story evolved, it's actually women turning on women. Athena basically turned Medusa into this horrible gargoyle. Or have we been told that? Is that our true version of the story? What we do when we're looking at this myth, we go back to what's our true story. Going back, finding the missing pieces in our own personal jigsaw that makes us, us. And the exercise we're doing, I call it soul retrieval. This is a shamanic term, and a lot of these words can be used as a catch-all for various techniques. And it is a form of past life regression. It is a form of going into the darkness, and also the hidden aspects as to, again, as we've found out where our golden shadow is. what else is in there that we have on a subconscious level disassociated ourselves from, largely as a safety mechanism, but is it still relevant to us today? This discovery flows on to module 6, where we are looking at the ghosts from our family past, understanding what aspects of ourselves, what limiting beliefs of ourselves are actually other people or our family line has come down through to us from some distant ancestor that we are still carrying. And we could be carrying these ancestral wounds or intergenerational ghosts for various reasons. And this module will be looking at how we can set about releasing, especially when it comes to chains of shame and guilt from our subconscious mind, but also doing so we are still honoring our family. And there's two sides of this coin. We could find out that we come from a line of repressed people, or we could also be from a line of the repressors. Or this day and age, we can even be from both lines of repressed and repressors. I know myself, I have both English and Scottish heritage, which means that my Celtic Scottish people ancestral line was removed from their lands during the Highland clearances by my English ancestral line. So I have this little bit of internal conflict within me. So these intergenerational ghosts is a good way of bringing these up and putting them to bed, releasing them, or even just acknowledging and accepting that. And we'll be doing this through stepping through what I call sacred ceremony and focusing around cleansing and purifying the 3 internal aspects of ourself, our body, mind, and spirit, because a lot of deep ancestral wounds or shadow work, if we don't deal with it properly, and depending on what sort of trauma it relates from, can actually build up and reside in our physical body as well. And this way we can connect more positively back to our ancestral line. And I'm not just talking about immediate ancestors, I'm talking about thousands and thousands of generations back. And then the final module is the ascent. We go back to the original story of Inanna's descent into the underworld, and we now come up. And it's in this coming up, it's in this ascent where we integrate all what we have learned, when we have become comfortable with our own authentic power, which for some people can be challenging, and we learn how to move this into the world, embracing our own sovereignty, standing in our own truth. It's not only just for when the course is finished, but continuously knowing what our boundaries are. And again, this can be challenging depending on around people in our life, because it could be a lot of kickback from other people who don't want to see us change, because that reflects back on them, or they perceive it to be reflecting back on them. So if you are interested in learning more about this course, as I said, it will be kicking off on Thursday, the 29th of June. It will be held fortnightly. Time zones may not fit where you are in the world, but everything will be recorded and you'll be given unlimited access to the meditations, to what's been discussed, the investment. And again, this is in Australian dollars, so it's $222 for all 7 modules. So I will put a link. We are over time now. I will put a link in when I send out the video in the recording for all about the books, about the my website, about this course, about the winter solstice, And if you have just joined from, say, social media and you're not on my emailing list, please go on to mysticalsoulacademy.com, sign up for the newsletter, because I'll be sending out the webinar recording through there. So we have actually gone way over time. I was hoping to address some of the questions. Unfortunately, I don't think we're going to have time. So I would like to thank everybody for spending this hour 10 minutes with me. When you get the recording, you can listen to the meditation again at any time that you want to. You can reach out to me. I'll put my contact details also in the email as well. So again, I will say thank you very much. It's been lovely to see so many people getting on board. I do wish you all the best. So please, I really hate writing myself. So check out my website. If there's something there of interest, reach out to me. If you've got any queries about my presentation, also, yes, Joe, I will be sending out, make sure I go onto what I will do. I will actually put my email in the chat. So please reach out to me, and what I will do too is multitasking is not always my forte as well. There's the web address to the course, Embracing the Shadows, and here's the standard web address, where if you're not part of my newsletter or would like to join up to my newsletter or get a copy of this recording, either email me at francesb.msa, mysticalsoulacademy@gmail.com, or go onto the website and you can join up a free newsletter. And if you only want to receive this recording, you're more than welcome to subscribe for that. So I am just going to stop the recording now, and I wish you a wonderful evening, day, and I hope to see you sometime soon. Blessings.